Hello, my name is Stephen Jones, and this is my video project for Ecclesiology. I will be discussing the topic of baptism, and specifically I will be making the argument that believers' baptism by immersion is the preferred biblical model for how to engage in the ordinance of baptism. Before I do that, I need to lay a little bit of groundwork regarding what baptism is and how it's been approached throughout the history of the church. You know, when we talk about baptism, one of the most common distinctions we always want to talk about is either do you baptize babies or do you baptize believers? And then the other question is, do you baptize by immersion or do you baptize by sprinkling? One of the questions is more important than the other, I think. But yeah, we're going to address both of them. But maybe the bigger picture, though, is to put all this in a larger context that helps make sense. Because first off, the larger issue isn't whether you do by sprinkling or by immersion, and it isn't whether you baptize just believers or baptize babies as well. The issue is why you're doing this. And so before you can understand these other choices, sometimes we get so bogged down in understanding the choices people make as to the practicalities and pragmatics of practicing the ordinance that we forget why they're there and what's going on behind it. So what I would like to do at the onset is explain the three, not two, the three main views of what baptism is and how it works. And I think once you realize this, you'll understand the arguments for how to engage in this ordinance becomes a little bit more clearer. You see, because the alternatives are between baptizing believers or babies, baptizing by immersion or by sprinkling, we think that there are two choices, but there's actually three. And so the first one is what's called the sacramental view. It views baptism as the act of regeneration itself. It believes that the water does, in some respect, do a little bit of the saving. There's a fancy Latin phrase. It means in opere operantis. It means the water itself does the work. And so the sacramental view, it's held primarily by Catholics, but also by Lutherans. It believes that you can't really be saved with it unless you're baptized. Obviously, this view has some issues because you think about the thief on the cross, right? Jesus told him, in spite of his inability to be baptized, that he would be with him that day in paradise. But that is one view, the sacramental view. And hence the reason why they baptize infants, because they believe that you got to get the grace through the performance of the sacrament. And failure to do so renders the person outside of God's grace. That might be an extreme way of saying it, but that is a matter-of-fact way of putting it. But the second view, and this is the one that's oftentimes overlooked by people from a Baptist tradition, is the so-called covenantal view. And the covenantal view sees baptism as the sign of the new covenant. In the same way that you had circumcision in the Old Testament, you have baptism in the New. It's a sign of your participation in the family of God. And so this view, which is often overlooked, is held by people from the Reformed tradition, like Presbyterians and other people from the sort of the Calvinist perspective. And the reason why they hold this view, the reason why they baptize babies, is something different than the reason why people from a Catholic tradition do. These people baptize babies for the same reason why ancient Jews circumcised babies, because it was a sign that they were a member of the covenant community. Against this, the reason why I am not a primary proponent of this one is a couple of things. One, the New Testament doesn't present an argument that circumcision is being replaced by baptism. You can kind of make the case that God is creating a new people of God in the New Testament, and therefore the new people of God requires a new sign. But there are all these places where, if that were the case, then it seems like a great place to say that the new sign of the new covenant is this new thing called baptism. But if you look at places like Romans 2:29, it says, A person is not a Jew who is one inwardly. A circumcision is circumcision of the heart, by the Spirit, not written by code. Such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God. So the move is from Paul makes the argument that it's not about changing ordinances from the circumcision in the Old Testament to this new thing. He says, no, God's gone from circumcising the body to circumcising the heart. I would also make the case that that the book of Galatians, if there was ever a spot where Paul could have said, look guys, we got this new thing called baptism, it's time to stop worrying about circumcision, that would have been the place. The whole book of Galatians is rooted in the idea that circumcision is not going to make you approved to God. And so people have come into Galatia and they've said, you got to do this or you're not a part of the covenant body. And Paul had the perfect opportunity, should he have wanted it, to say, look guys, baptism has replaced it, and so you don't need to be circumcised. But he never says that. True, that's an argument from silence, but I believe that it's a pretty strong argument. And then last, it's the view that's held by many people in the Baptist tradition. It's called the ordinance view, or you might call the believer's baptism view. And it's the belief that we practice baptism because it was commanded by Jesus, and we practice baptism as a symbol of our public profession of faith. There's all of these examples when Ananias clears the scales off of Paul's eyes. He says, Paul, get up, be baptized, calling upon the name of Jesus, washing away your sins. That it's a declaration of our faith. In the same way that it's in the book of 1 Peter. 1 Peter 3:21, it talks about a baptism is an appeal to God for a clear conscience. So the idea is that baptism doesn't affect our salvation. It doesn't confirm our participation in a community. Rather, it declares our allegiance, and it seems to fit better with what Jesus told us to do when he told us to be baptized. In Matthew 28 at the Great Commission, he says, "Go ye therefore into all the world, making disciples, baptizing them and teaching them." So making a disciple begins with the Pledge of Allegiance. It's your inauguration into your confirmation that you are making this public declaration of who Jesus is, and now you must be instructed as well. And so it seems more likely that it seems more appropriate to view baptism from the perspective of this public declaration of a believer's commitment to follow Jesus. Now, once you have those categories in your head, you realize that who is baptized and how become second order issues. So who should be baptized? A sacramental view says that all people should be baptized because you need this in order to affect your salvation. A covenantal view says baptism confirms your participation in the corporate community, but it's not about faith. It's about being about the body, and one day you will confirm your own faith. I think that the arguments I've just laid out sort of encourage us to believe that the primary view should be the ordinance view. And if you look back over the history of the church, you realize that the sacramental view and the covenantal view are all latecomers to the party. The sacramental view is of faith itself being the act of baptismal regeneration is late. It's late relatively. It's like it begins in the Middle Ages, and the covenantal view doesn't emerge till the Reformation. I would make an argument, not very strongly, that maybe perhaps the covenantal view was developed culturally among people who were used to baptizing their infants but recognized the flaws in the sacramental view. But if you look at the history of the church, you find people even in the 2nd century AD. Justin Martyr says that the preferred method that refers to baptism of believers. And Tertullian and Gregory of Nazianzus actually talk about baptism, the emergence of infant baptism in their day, so around the 300s, as a novel new thing. And so it seems like that is a later thing, and the primary way that people would be baptized would be like in the Jewish tradition, that it would be as an act of personal testimony. Now you come to the final question of how. How? Oh, I guess I should go back and say that neither the sacramental nor the covenantal view believe that believers shouldn't be baptized. They just also believe, everyone believes in believers' baptism. They just also believe that infants should be baptized as well. If you come to personal faith, you should be baptized at that moment. No one denies that. But how? How should you do it? This is where maybe I break from a little bit of my Baptist roots. I believe that yes, immersion is the preferred and primary way of performing this ordinance, but I don't necessarily think it's the necessary to do it that way all the time. I do believe it's central. The word baptism actually means to immerse. It comes from the dyeing wool, dyeing cloth industry. It literally can mean soak thoroughly. And so I used to kid people that you got to hold them under for a full 3 Mississippis before you can claim somebody is a Baptist. And sometimes we insist on this a little too much, but there are obviously places where full immersion wouldn't have been possible. And yet salvation and declaration are still important. So Steve on the cross wasn't immersed at all. You think also about the Philippian jailer, like he wants to baptize this whole house. This when Paul wants to baptize him, they clearly couldn't have done it full immersion. And so it's possible that the church has always made allowances for performing baptisms in other ways besides full immersion. And so I'm not one of those people that, like, sometimes my church here insists overly strict about, okay, believers' baptism by immersion. And so if a person has made a personal confession of faith and was baptized after that, but it wasn't by full immersion, then they make them redo the process. And I'm not sure I agree with that. I believe that the church has always made allowances for exceptional circumstances, with that being the preferred model. What's interesting is, in the absence of a lot of water, sprinkling is allowed. In the absence of any water, do you know what's allowed? Do you know what's encouraged? The use of sand as a symbol of death, burial, and resurrection. Well, those are my arguments for the ordinance view of believers' baptism by immersion. Thank you.